today we are going to shake things up. We have a special guest in the studio with us today, and this happens to be the one and only Attila the Horticulturist. So, welcome Attila. It's lovely to have you here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
And let me just say that Attila is, he's for our listeners that are around the world, 34 countries. Attila is...
Shout out to all those countries.
That's right. He's in our region. It probably gets a little harsher than Canberra where he is. He's just like out of Canberra a bit. And Attila has an extensive background in horticulture. He has... So horticulture, I guess, is his speciality, and his career has probably manifested itself more into professional gardening now. But I tell you one thing, it just blows you away, that shows you what he can really do, is when you go and see his orchard and his productive space. And I always say, high intensity gardening. Well done.
So welcome to the On Garden Design podcast with longtime friends Fleur and Sachi, where we chat about what makes a garden great, and we try to inspire and make designing accessible to anyone who is interested in gardens, plants and chatting. Your hosts are longtime friends Fleur and Sachi, that's me, who bring a fresh perspective and their life experience to designing gardens as a second career. You can find us on Facebook and Insta, follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, then you'll know when the next episode is available. So you've heard, we're chatting with Attila today, and we've got a bit of a rough plan, what we're going to ask him. We're basically going to extract as much information out of him as we can. So we're going to talk about plant choices, we're going to talk about maintenance, and we're also going to talk about what his advice to garden designers might be.
Yeah, now this is going to be great. Look, we really need to stop chatting ourselves, don't we? We have to hear from the man.
We have to. Let's go.
30 years into 30 minutes.
That's
okay,
right.
Yeah,
so
work.
We're going to make it really tough for Attila. But let's start with, I think, on a lot of our listeners, they want to know about plants, and we're going to touch a little bit on that as first up. So first of all, as an expert in plants, what's your criteria for choosing a plant?
Number one is probably pest-free, and you could call it easy maintenance, or I like to call it obvious maintenance. So the plant shows you how it needs to be maintained. Whether or not it can be topiary, whether or not it's a hand pruning, whether or not it's an annual cut back to the ground. So that's sort of some of the criteria. The other thing too is that it has to have a seasonal interest, but it has to be able to perform 365 days of the year.
Hear you on that.
Yeah.
That's so good.
So because a flower is great, but a flower will only last sometimes 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If you're lucky, it will last longer, but it's a very short time for most plants, and a lot of the time I find people will focus just on the flower, but it won't always flower the same every year either, whereas the plant will hopefully be there every year. In Canberra at the moment, the rhododendrons are probably the best they've been in a long, long time. The azaleas, same thing. But when the azaleas finish flowering, they look very ordinary.
Especially when the thrips get to them.
Yes, yeah. Oh, and petal blight and all that sort of thing. So, so they're my main criteria. And then obviously how frost hardy it is, how well it copes with different soils. So not only it can cope with well-drained soils, but heavier soils. And obviously anyone who lives in Canberra, we know we've had 3 very wet years, and now we're going back into a dry year. How do we find a plant that can cope with very wet years, but also now very dry years, hotter weather, but also a plant that can survive September frosts, and then 2 days later it's 30 degrees.
Gosh, we ask a lot from these plants, don't we?
We ask an awful lot, and and that's the most difficult thing, and not looking at, yes, we can water, but looking how well we can use the water and how well the plants respond to the water. So there's a lot of things in there, how quickly they respond to a little bit of rain.
Yep.
So you'll see the difference, because Canberra we're often blessed with quite a few thunderstorms in summer and things like that. You'll see the plants that are really well adapted, because they will respond instantly. So they will, like a 20 mil storm, and all of a sudden they just look so much better. Whereas plants that aren't adapted to our climate will just sulk. And
I just have to quickly ask a question, because I think one of the things that people get challenged with is you have all these criteria. How do you work out what plant fits those criteria? Because often the labels don't reflect. And we were just giggling because, frost hardiness is not necessarily reflected on a plant label when you go into a nursery. So how do you actually work out what the right plants are?
So the first thing I did when I moved to Canberra is I walked all the different suburbs. So I would walk all the front streets. So I would walk Narrabundah, I would walk Ainslie, I would go into the new suburbs of Isabella Plains, Banks. So I would see what was actually growing. Then I'd go back to those same areas 12 months later and see how well the trees have grown, see what they've done, see if they've got see how the maintenance is. Go to commercial spaces, see how well the gardens are there. Go to body corporate areas. And often I would go around and I would try and go when gardeners would be there, and I would go and ask them questions because that's going to give you the best idea of actually what is happening, in our local area, but a diversity of local areas. So areas that are well established, areas that were brand new. So you could actually see a construction site. So you can see, there's only rock
Clay.
here.
Yep.
They've got nothing left. And so because it changes so much in Canberra,
Yeah. Look, that's a great tip for a home gardener is, if you've come to a new area, a new suburb or new sort of space, is to have a good look around your neighbourhood.
Yep.
Find out, look what works.
What's doing well.
Look at the established gardens and see what's actually looking really good.
And don't judge a tree by what it looks like in a pot.
Yeah, that's really, or just by the label, because I think they can be really misleading as well.
That's right.
I'm going to let's go into our next question, which is most of our listeners are not in our hardiness zone, which is 9A in Canberra. So what would your top 3 plants be that would work well in most garden zones?
That's a tough question.
It is a tough question.
Yeah, it's so Elaeagnus across in Biggie Eye, which I think the common name might be Russian olive, but I think that's a slightly different species. But Elaeagnus I know will grow from -10 to +45.
wow.
As a hedge, really?
Well, it's as a screening plant. So again, it's something that doesn't have to be clipped really, really tight, but it will work as a screening plant, as a hedge. If you've got the space, you can just let it completely ramble and do its thing. Wistringias, obviously. So any of the wistringias, they're all really good, but they definitely benefit from trimming. So,
and regular trimming.
Regular
and a
trimming,
lot of
yes.
natives do, and a lot of people think it's set and forget, but if you want a good-looking native, you've got to keep at it.
Hang on, Westringia. Oh, Westringia. I'm thinking wisteria. Where am I?
No. So, wisteria is a great version. Wisteria will grow in Sydney, Melbourne, here.
But it's a bit wild.
Yes. So, Teucrium fruticans is another really good sort of, screening plant. Largostromias, crepe myrtles, we all love those. They can grow from North Queensland to Tasmania. So they're such a wide...
They cope with a lot of rain, do they?
Yeah, they're surprising. The only thing is I know in the Atherton tablelands they tend to be short-lived because they don't lose their leaves.
Oh, right, okay. So they become an evergreen effectively.
It's like a laying chicken. It just goes all the time.
Yes.
It falls over in 3 years.
I love that analogy.
And then cottonus is really nice as well, although I don't know how well that would do in the humid climates. But
that's a smoke bush for
That's a smoke bush, So, and there's a huge variety of those. I mean, we could spend 3 hours just talking on plants, obviously.
We sure will.
We'll stop on those because it's quite a big list. But if you walk your neighbourhood, that is the number one key.
That's great tip.
And I reckon that's a great segue into our last question on plant choices, and that is the top 3 plants that you'd like to see garden designers use more of and less of. Let's start with the more of because...
we'll go less of first,
less
if
of.
that's all right. We'll do the bad news first.
Okay.
So this is specifically for Canberra climate. Don't plant birch.
Yes, totally agree.
Birch are done.
They're beautiful, but not in the climate change world.
We're talking because they just require too much water for our climate?
No, our soil is not right because they're river flat plants. So they grow in 2 metres of gravel with constant water below. So they need that depth of gravel to grow in, and then they've got the water underneath. Canberra doesn't have that, except in a handful of positions we might do. So they're beautiful. I love them. And you've got the paper mark maples. They're incredible, but they're just not a long-term plant, and they fall apart, and they're just not, unfortunately, good enough for us to use. The other one for me is the Caloriana pears.
I knew you were going to say this because I've been looking at mine thinking, don't break.
Or then they will all break. After a certain period, they'll start from 20 years, some might make it to 30 years, but all the calorie pears will eventually split.
Now, that's a really interesting one because they are so widely used by the local government for street planting. And for parks and for everything. And the home gardener. Most people have one in their garden.
I get the feeling, though, it was a real trend. I think
it was.
We've probably worked out now that we've had them for long enough that maybe they're not
It came out of North America, and so they were using them, and so we started using them. but their failure rate over there started about 10 years before it did here, because they were using them 10 years before we did. And they were great. They tick every box.
They do.
Every single box. They are fantastic trees, and I just hate that they don't work and that they fall apart, but they make great pollards. So
it'd be fascinating to know if someone is out there trying to hybridise something that actually has not that failure element in it.
Well, see, if you can find the correct Manchurian pear, that's a brilliant tree. So which is the actual Pyrus euceriensis. It's a solid, great grower, but you won't find it anywhere. But Pyrus nivalis, Pyrus salicifolia, they're all fine to use. They're all really solid plants to use.
So it's just the Caleriana.
Just the Caleriana clones that are really, really, unfortunately, not that great.
Brittle.
Yeah, and the other one is Magnolia Little Gem. Unlike, however...
Got one in my garden.
However...
and a Caleriana. And a birch. Oh, no.
I've got 3 pears, 2 Magnolia Little Gems, but no birch. So I'm guilty as anybody.
I've only got one of them. I'm feeling good now.
But Teddy Bear, which is one of the newer clones, is amazing. Like...
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, Teddy Bear
So
is...
for our listeners, we're talking about the evergreen magnolias?
Yes,
Yeah. They
So
go grandiflora.
whereas Little Gem just doesn't seem to perform, whereas Teddy Bear seems to be an amazing one. So that one, I guess, segues
So why is
into...
Little Gem not performing? Mine's doing so well. Or maybe I have Cape Harris. Yeah, okay.
But it's not a plant that does... So it might do well in your garden because you've got shelter, much better soil than most of us. But what I've seen is because I go all over, is that Teddy Bear has performed best in a much wider variety of conditions.
Right.
And more exposure and the things like that. So whereas Little Gem seems much more fussy about where it's planted.
Position.
Yeah.
Right. So now we know not what to use in our gardens, or what designers shouldn't use,
Yes.
because they're 3 things that I probably don't use birches so much in my designs, but the others I do use. So tell us what you'd like to see designers use more of.
Ginkgo.
Oh, it's a big tree though.
Stinko,
Not-
ginkgo.
Yeah, but if you
But
use...
the right one.
If you
Yeah.
use Princeton Century, which is the taller, narrower one, you're not going to get a better yellow
Yes.
colour. And a lot of the time that I found that people resisted planting it is because it's much slower than a pear.
Yes,
So
it
it
would
will
be.
generally, but it will survive, and it's really, really good. And you just don't get that yellow because the entire tree goes yellow and just defoliate, and it's just a magnificent tree. So
It's magnificent when it's just green as well.
Yeah,
I
but
just
it-
love the leaf shape.
it also has a lot of winter interests as well. So the bark and the little buds are they're just really, really good. Like and if you position it right, it's just a fantastic little tree. The other one that I'd love to see more again but grown as an evergreen tree is Luma apiculata, the Chilean myrtle.
I don't know that at all.
Spectacular bark.
I sometimes use it for hedging.
Yes.
Is that right?
Great.
Okay,
Well,
good.
it's got a small leaf.
Yes.
So I'd prefer to see that as a hedge than Viburnum odoratissimum. As I
Yes.
said, the dome plant could be quite big
Very
as
long.
well. So yeah, Luma apiculata, because we don't have a lot of evergreen trees that can be managed in Canberra. So like
That's true.
there's conifers, which are great, but they're hard to manage, whereas this is a really great tree. You can manage it from 3 metres to 6 metres. It has multi-trunks, beautiful flowers, great fruit, and possums don't touch it.
Oh, bonus.
Yeah.
Gosh, I might have to really look into that one, because they could have that as a bit of a feature tree if
Absolutely.
you prune it right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'm thinking for those people who are thinking, I've got to write this down, we'll put a list on our Instagram of the plants that Attila's talking about in the haves and the have-nots.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe
As I
some
said-
pictures too.
Yes.
As I said, this list could be quite large. The other one and I just had to put it on because I'm a Phlomis collector, would be the Jerusalem sages.
Yeah.
So they're very hardy and very long-lived, and you've got quite a variety. So a great hardy plant for full sun. But
And it's those seed heads that
Yes.
go through winter
Yes.
that just look really spectacular as well.
So it has a good interest, and it's a great little sort of filler plant. So rather than just always using lavender, you can use, but that's one of mine because I'm just biased towards it.
Fantastic.
I think we've all got our biases.
Oh, we do. I do. And look, I would just love to pepper you with more questions about plants. But, we're kind of going to take that theme and move into the maintenance side of our questioning, because and plants feature in this. So you see a lot of gardens, right, as a professional gardener.
Yes.
And we want to sort of I guess, first of all, understand what constitutes a high-maintenance garden.
Probably the highest maintenance are Photinia hedges and latent conifer hedges. They are by far, and believe it or not, fruit trees.
Interesting.
Because
just because of the pruning.
The pruning, the pests, potential pests and things like that, and yeah, they just need more because you normally do winter pruning, you do summer pruning, and there's a little bit more. It's not hard once you know, but it's always a bit like roses. People tend to go, oh, how do I prune it? What do I do? And things like that. And there are key times when you do it. But as I said, I would say Photinia and latent conifer hedges, especially Photinias, because they can grow so quick.
Yep.
And latent conifer hedges, if you don't catch them at the right time, then they've grown too far. You end up with big brown patches because they're conifers, and if they die out,
then they don't grow back.
Yeah, they don't grow back. But they just need a lot because you need. In the growing season, there's one latent hedge that I do. You might be doing it every 4 weeks.
Oh wow, that's intensive.
To keep it looking like really good. So
they can get so big as well.
They will get very large if they're not hedged.
Yes,
they're a good windbreak if you have a rural property.
Well, yeah, they're a useless windbreak.
Oh, are they?
So, yeah. So
the big brown patch, which is a hole where the wind goes.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
the wind tunnel.
Well, that's what they create because they lose their lower limbs and the wind just hits them and flows straight in underneath.
You see them all the time.
I know, but that's because you
People
see them
don't
all the
know
time
what
and
they're
then people go, oh, that's a good windbreak. And then, so it's great
Well, we're
as
just
part of
spelling
it.
myths, aren't we?
It's great as part of a shelter belt, but you wouldn't just have them.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
Definitely not rurally because if you have a fire, then your windbreak's gone.
That's true. That is
Yeah.
very true.
So you always plant trees that respond back. So so that's the surprising because I was thinking about this question: what is the most high maintenance thing? And definitely those
the hedging.
Like the hedging.
Are there other features or sort of other elements that people put in their gardens?
Hardscaping, even.
Yeah, that is a high maintenance issue for you. As a gardener, are you still involved in looking at other accessories in a garden?
Well, decking probably if you want to oil it and you need to do that. That's definitely one of the but most of the people that I garden for, they've either done tiles, they've got rid of the deck, so they don't have any maintenance anymore with the decking, or they just let the deck go grey.
Silver, yeah.
So they don't have any maintenance on that.
It's a very sensible idea, I think.
What about ponds and water features? Do you get involved in those?
I have no ponds or water features.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people want them, but I always think they really are a commitment.
I used to have
really
one.
Manage it.
Yeah, so I used to have one pond that I looked after, and he goes, it's losing a lot of water. I said, okay, I can waterproof it and do all the stuff with it and fill it with fiberglass. And I dug it out and it's just like, here's your problem. There's a half-inch root growing straight through the bottom of the pond. So that's where the water's going. And so,
Bet that was a plant doing really well
it was. Everything was doing, and because it wasn't losing a lot of water because the root was almost plugging the hole itself. So it was just slowly leaking out
I'll tell you,
around
those plants,
it.
they've got brains,
Oh,
don't
they
do.
Yeah. So
they're tapping in.
But yeah, ponds are definitely a higher maintenance. But as I said, most of my all they have now is water bowls, and then a lot of them are put in insect bowls, so they're much shallower with rocks and little things. So
Which are easy to clean out and maintain.
And then the bees can swim out, and you see them, they lined up around the edge, drinking from it, and then off they go
gorgeous.
and things like that. So
it's a good alternative to a pond. Having just done my annual clean out of my pond, which is a horrible job.
Yeah, so
That's
the
a
one
good
that
tip.
most people use would probably be that I've seen would be the urns on a big sump. So that way you've just got your feature, and then the water just
spilling over it.
spills over, and it's quiet enough so that it's not annoying when it's quiet at night.
It means you don't feel like you need to go to the toilet all the time.
Yeah, and they're really easy to, because if you just get one of those big drainage sumps, which you can put a ton on top of them, it's just really super easy to do. You just cut a hole, your pump is in there, or you've got a pump externally. So, but yeah, no, water features would definitely be up there. But as I say, I definitely don't do water features.
And I guess the next question is really almost the follow-on to this. So what have you seen designers and home gardeners design into their gardens, which eventually ends up being a maintenance headache?
The biggest thing that drives me insane is planting too close to the fence or the house. Because maintenance 5 years down the track, you've got a plant that is now sideways. It doesn't matter what it is. If it was, God forbid, it was just a hedge around the boundary, planted 30 centimetres from the fence, it's always sideways. It's impossible to maintain. And 20 years down the track, when they want to replace their fence, they then have to remove their hedge because that's in the way, or trees or anything like that. So it's about also considering what the neighbour, are you going to be shading the neighbour? Have you planted something that's too tall on the fence, like Callery pears, which are now 11 metres tall, 30 centimetres from a fence.
And dropping limbs over to your neighbour's side.
Dropping limbs.
Gift.
And also pushing the fence over.
Oh, yes.
I was about to say, I have a latent cypress hedge behind my house, and my partner calls it the Great Wall of China.
Yeah.
Because it's huge.
And so that is, and then too close to the house.
Yeah.
So again, because we're planting plants that might be 30 centimetres tall, that get 3 metres. So when they're little, it's all great. Thankfully, we don't have rubber trees in Canberra, so,
Yes, that's right. There are some benefits of not being in a tropical area.
Yes, so we don't have any fig trees that are just plonked at the back door and just happily growing and destroying houses. So that's a blessing.
So it's about really think about what you're putting close to the house, what could disrupt the foundations, and also what are you putting on your boundaries that are going to cause an irritation to your neighbour or
but even that
difficult
maintenance
to maintain.
That maintenance issue, if you need to access your fence at any point or, you need to access your house wall to repaint, if it's too close, it's going to be really hard.
But the other thing, especially with, say, just a plain hedge, if it's further from the fence and the backside is facing north, I can get a lot more light through to the hedge. And so it'll actually be thicker because I can hedge it on the fence side really thickly and on the other side. Whereas if it's too close to the fence, you tend to find you get a lot more light through it. So you're not getting that nice sort of screening effect rather than if you can. And then I've got complete control of it because I can hedge all sides of it.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about the neighbour not hedging it because you see that all the time. You see this hedge that's a metre over into the neighbour's property because it's, they're not interested in gardening or anything like that, and so then you can't get access to it, and so there's a whole heap of things, and that would be my number one thing that, drives me the most insane.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think you've been in a lot of gardens, you've seen a lot, and what we thought we'd ask you is if you had any clever and until now secret, because they're not secret anymore, any clever maintenance hacks that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I don't know if it's really a hack. It's just something. So if you have to reduce the height of a hedge or a tree or something like that, or it's growing over a path. So often I see, okay, I want that hedge at 2 metres high. And so it gets reduced back, and it was 3 metres high, and it gets reduced back to 2 metres. And it's like, well, that's the height you want it at. I'm going to take it down to 1.5 metres because you want it at 2 metres. So I'm going to take it down further so that the regrowth comes back and I can actually make it much thicker, because as soon as it regrows, it's not going to be 2 metres anymore, it's going to be 2.5 metres. And same with off a path. So if you want access, you go, they cut it right on the line of the path. They go, no, we'll go further back. So then therefore we can get it thick, and then we don't have to cut it back every year. Then it can stay, it's much easier. It'll be 3 or 4 years before we need to worry about it again if it's gotten too big. So that's probably my main one that I see. It's just like, no, 2 metres. I said, no, I don't want it. No, trust me. It'll regrow. It's plants. It's not architecture. It's not a building. The whole idea. But also is timing the pruning as well is probably the big one, especially for anything. So if you've got deciduous trees, like evergreen hedges. So for tinnias, if you need to rejuvenate them, you're doing them sort of before they flower in the end of July.
Will that stop them flowering?
That'll stop them flowering.
Thank God. Everyone take note of that.
Yeah, that's right. Very important.
And you can cut them back really, really hard then, and they will respond really quickly. The thing is, you're not going to be looking at dead, open plant for very long.
Yes.
Whereas with a Pittosporum, if you need to reduce it, you would wait until about the end of September because it hasn't moved yet.
So the timing's really important when you do something like this.
So that way you're not looking at a bare, ugly, hacked back, because it's very difficult to make something that you're reducing look really pretty.
Yes.
Like it's going to look fairly ordinary.
There's going to be some woody stuff happening.
Yeah, and so it's all about learning that timing with the different plants. And then, so the other thing too is, so I do a lot of pollarding, so that's taking things back to a particular point year after year after year. But I'll also look at the weather and how happy the tree is. So during really hot, dry weather, like the previous summer, I won't necessarily pollard every year, just to give the plant a break.
Yeah, when it's already struggling.
Yeah, so we do cotinus a lot of the time. So smoke bush we'll just pollard it because it looks fantastic with the new growth. So the last few years has been easy because they've grown a lot. Crepe myrtles is another one because, you pollard them. But again, it's just timing, looking at the weather, looking at how happy the plant is, not stressing it more than it needs to be.
So, I mean, this is really saying to me, for people who are, gardeners and garden designers, you need to know about the horticulture of plants to make the right choices at the right time as well. It's not just about reading the label in a nursery and going, oh yeah, that sounds about the right colour and shape for my garden. There's a whole lot more that you want to be thinking about if you want your garden to look good into perpetuity.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of garden designers, a lot of home gardeners, a lot of, well, landscape architects, you know, people in this sort of profession, they don't come to designing gardens from a horticultural background. So what are the planting mistakes you often see in planting designs that landscape architects and garden designers are making?
Probably the two that I see most commonly, because I've done a variety of different landscape architects' gardens, so I've maintained them from essentially the day after they were installed to coming 2 years after they've been installed. So the thing that I see is overplanting, which is, especially when you've got a blank space, and I understand because it's just, people want something there because they don't want to bear. Yeah. So what I often ask is plant things, and it's much better now, is that they'll plant just quick growing things in between just to fill that space, and then they'll be the nurse plants or the sacrificial plants, and then
pioneer plants.
Yeah, and they might only last a year, or they'll throw annual seed out or something like that just to get that ecology going. And so
I love that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. It looks good really quickly.
Yeah.
And the other one, and this is really hard because it's not the designer's intent, and they don't really have much say in the matter, but they often plant the shade-loving plants at the start of the design around the new tree, and there's no shade.
Yes.
And the poor things get absolutely fried. And it's really hard to articulate to the client that, okay, we need to come back in 5 years' time because this is shady now. Now we plant it. But they're like, I want it done now. And it's like, okay. And then why is this plant looking so odd? Because the shade isn't here yet. And so
I struggle with that, actually.
Yeah.
And I often say to particularly clients who are going to do their own planting, I'll say, you know, these are the plants that I want you to wait. I want you to hold off if you can until we get some canopy. Get those trees in straight away. But, you know, people are impatient. They want to put them in. And that's where, you know, I know in my own garden I've moved, you know, I've got a rose bush underneath the Calirana pear and it's struggling because it's just too shady.
Oh, look, if plants at my house could have a frequent flyers card, I could fly first class around the world daily. Like, it's just, I've moved so many plants.
Yeah.
And that's what you do because it changes. But everything has to be in ecology. It has to have, you know, you're starting with something that's new. So you're going to have all those pioneer plants, and then until they get in, it's like everything needs, eventually you'll get the diversity of age, but you need that. Like, it's just, and that's what we're trying to create, is that diversity of age in the garden. You're pulling things out, they naturally die, or you just cut them back, or and that's what they are. Like, some plants only last 4 months, some will last 6 months, some will last 600 years. Yeah. So you've got a full ecology to think about. And so when I go into people's gardens and it's new, and I said, well, it takes me 12 months to get my head around it. And I said, I have a 20 to 30-year plan for your garden. I'll be gone, you know, but that's the plan I have for your garden. It's a long term. You know, I'm thinking of that for 40 years down the track. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. So I said, I'm not looking at tomorrow, I'm looking at 40 years' time.
So the moral of this story is, with a garden, you need to be patient. And I'm starting to think that there's always two phases to a garden. There's the hot phase when it's young and it's being established. And then at some point, because I'm dealing with this in my garden now, it becomes a shady garden. And then you're trying to find things that work in that space. And I spend most of my time moving stuff at the moment from, you know, trying to find another space where the hot thing's going to still survive.
How does a home gardener who's listening to us get some hope out of this?
Well, there's plenty to do. You'll remain fit for the rest of your life.
Gym membership for life.
That's right.
And the main thing is just practice it.
Yeah.
Like, just practice and observe.
And don't be afraid.
Just don't be afraid. Yeah. And just practice and just fill your garden. Like, if you're new, just fill your garden up with what we call, like, you know, the potatoes and pasta plants. You know, you've just, you know.
The carbs.
Yeah, just fill your garden up with carbs because you know that they're going to do really well. Look, plant McDonald's plants, but don't plant 1,000 of them so your place looks like a McDonald's car park. You know,
that would be Nandinas.
Yeah, which I have Nandinas at home. But when you see how they're used differently, like, people hate them, but when you see them used under Japanese maples, they look completely different. And so, as I said, I don't need to do anything to them except a once-a-year prune. That's it. They don't need any water, nothing. And so my garden is full of carbs, absolutely chock-a-block. And then I've got a sprinkling of truffle over here, a little bit of caviar over there. Yeah, and so you hide your precious plants.
I want to come and eat at your garden.
Yeah, you
That's
hide
right.
and you put these precious plants in once you're confident. You go, oh, I want a little collectible or this or that.
Yeah.
Because we all do. We've all got all these bog standard plants, and just practice and just keep planting and don't be afraid to move it.
And they are the foundation, really, of a garden. They're the things that give it structure, and that's what we need to be thinking about.
So if a designer can put in the structure, and then the home gardener needs to take on that longer term vision of saying, I'm going to personalise it with the caviar and those type of
that's what I
bit of seasoning.
I recommend. Or someone goes, I said, no, get a designer in. I said, you absolutely must get a designer in, so they will set your garden up. They'll set all your...
Set the bones.
Yeah, well, they'll set your views from inside the house. They'll set where the trees are right. They'll get the shading right. They'll get all these sort of things right. The hardscaping, if you want it. They will get all that right. They will do that. And then we can just do all the peripheries, which is what it is. It's sort of like we're doing the painting. We're just finishing off doing the decorating. And that's the easy stuff, because it doesn't... It's like if you paint a wall bright fluorescent green, you go, oh, that didn't work. You can just paint over it.
That's right. But to have the wall in the right place and, in the right design mode for the rest of the house.
Well, especially a tree, because the designer can get the tree in the right spot.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because that's going to be a long-term thing, whereas the other little stuff is easy to work around. But I always say, no, get a designer in, get them to talk to you, get them back, and then they can do a whole plan for you. But particularly how it relates to the house as well, which is really, really important, because a lot of people, especially in Canberra, for 4 months of the year, will spend a lot of time inside because it's cold, and we'll be looking outside, and it's just like, no, think about what you're looking out.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is Edna Walling always talked about that.
Yes. And so I feel like we've almost covered our last question, which was what advice or wisdom would you impart to a designer? But I think the fact is you've actually said that, to a home gardener, you give this wisdom that people should go to a designer, which I think is an extremely good bit of wisdom. But do you have other bits of wisdom or advice that you would give to a garden designer?
Just have fun with it. I can just trial different things. It's just like we all trial different things, and I think I think between designers and horticulturalists, like we're different, but we're also together. Like, because a good design, and I've banged on about this before, but a good design, a well-designed garden, if it isn't properly maintained, it loses all that design integrity. And I always say, look, you've spent so much on this, get it maintained. Don't wait 3 years after it's been planted. Get me in straight away if you can, get me in, because I'm not busy with everything else. But that's the main thing. Get it in, get the maintenance going really early, especially the trees and the framework and all the rest of it. That's the most important. I went in Hartley on the weekend, and there was 3 gardens that were all done by designers. They were all completely different. But you could tell, and I think you mentioned this last week, Fleur, is that you could tell the gardens were designed. You could see where everything was positioned just right. The paths, the widths of the paths, the widths of the garden bed. Everything was just right. Everything felt so right. Whereas you go to a garden that isn't designed, it just doesn't. It's nice, but it doesn't feel as right as this well-designed.
It hangs together and feels like a whole.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really refreshing that you can see that, because, that's sort of from our perspective as designers, that's really what we want to achieve. We want to be that. For a lot of people, they can't quite work out why it feels good and feels right, but they just know it does.
Yeah,
so it's great that you can observe that and let us know that.
Well, and not everything needs to be topiaried either. And so I see that too often is just like, all they'll do is everything is hedged, everything is bald, and it's no. If it's all bald, it loses its impact. It's just like, no, some things can be hand pruned and etc. So, it's just knowing what the maintenance is, how obvious it is, just getting out there and doing it, but trying to maintain that design integrity and going back to the design as well.
Yeah.
Having a look what the initial design was and going, and then 5 years later, it's not, well, call the designer back and say, look, this is how it's changed. A neighbour might have built a new house, or their trees growing, or all these things. So it's constant observation. It's a constant observation, and it's not static.
Yes.
Like we say, we grow plants, not bricks.
That's right. That's so true.
You know,
so
and
true.
Sachi, I think you mentioned it. We're dealing with growth.
Yes.
Yeah, it's dynamic.
evolution.
That's
It's
right.
continuing to evolve.
Yeah.
Well, look, it's been such a treat to have you, Attila. And honestly, we could go on and on. If you want to follow, because he's full of wisdom, follow our Instagram, Attila the Horticulturist, and you can see the depth of his knowledge and some really great tips. And I love the fact that you put so much information on your posts. I learn a lot from that, so thank you.
We've all stolen some of your plant lists.
Good. It's just, I want to make as much of the resources that are in my mind that I know that have worked, just so people just enjoy gardening and they're not frightened to try it, and they're happy to go with it.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up at that point. And thanks so much, Attila. For those who are listening, don't forget to follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also find us on Instagram or Facebook. We'll talk to you again in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic.
See you later.
Then.